This presentation, also from the Athabasca University, and reimagining assessment through effective response and critical thinking. Welcome, Lorelei.
Thank you. So I'm not so good at this, so I'm just, which is weird, hey? I work online and this is not great at this. So should I have my presentation already in the slideshow?
You just need to hit share and then choose your screen. So just click on the up arrow, you have access to share. Yeah. And then just share your screen.
Okay. Is it there?
Or yep, no? We can see it.
Oh, excellent. Oh, good. Okay. So I kind of retitled my presentation to make it more descriptive of what I'm really talking about. So I retitled it Connecting to Students' Emotionality Regarding Nature Through Alternative Assessment. So, and before I get going, I would like to acknowledge that I'm located on Amiskwachi Waskahikan, or Edmonton, which is Treaty 6 and Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4 territory, as well as the traditional territory of other Indigenous peoples. And I give this land acknowledgement as a part of a commitment to live lightly on these lands and to demonstrate deep respect and kindness to all those for whom this is their ancestral territory. So I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of context for my motivations in creating this assignment. When I first created it, I didn't actually know anything about alternative assessment. That came later in the years, and it's been very exciting. I've been so intrigued by the presentations I've already heard, and the enthusiasm that everybody has is just contagious. So thank you to everybody and to Deb and Eliana for organizing this again. So for many years, I've had close at hand a quote from the Pulitzer Prize winning poet and environmental activist Gary Snyder that goes something like this: don't feel guilty about the state of the world. If you start to care for the environment because you feel guilt, your care for it will be unsustainable. If you're going to save it because you love it. So as an environmental activist, that quote has become in many ways a kind of a personal mantra that I really try to remember when I'm feeling overwhelmed by, the multiple crises that are going on. But I also find, as I've been more conscious of alternative assessment and doing things differently, that quote has also been instructive to me as an environmental studies professor. I see my job as a professor of not being so much about teaching my students to memorize a bunch of environmental facts, since that kind of information changes all the time, continuously. And besides, it's really readily available to most of my students in that high-speed computer that they have in their back pocket. So instead, I see my job as helping them to think critically, to distinguish, distinguish reliable and valid information from conjecture and mis and disinformation, and to inspire them to support, or to inspire and support them to imagine a different world. But given the extent of destructive extraction and exploitation occurring, which is the central focus of all of the courses that I tutor and develop. Alongside these objectives, I also strive to give my students some hope and to engage with their emotions. So I think instinctively we all know we're emotional beings, and that governs our actions at least at some level. But largely what you see within kind of the professional environmental field, be it environmental scientists or policymakers or even innovators, is they approach environmental issues like climate change with what Deborah Davidson calls a strictly cerebral lens. So this slide features the front cover of a great new book that Deborah has written that discusses climate emotionality. And she's part of a growing group of scholars and activists that are really researching and discussing how we really need to focus on emotions if we're going to create societal change. So she explains that feeling our way to change involves three things: reflexivity, so learning to sit with our emotions and really understand what those emotions are; efficacy, so cultivating that emotional and cognitive capacity for committing ourselves to a course of action, which means, weighing options, and certainly trying to figure out which will be meaningful actions. So really engages that kind of critical thinking, and then developing empathy for ourselves and for others. So a key question for me for quite some time has been, how can I, as an environmental educator, support students to tap into their emotions around environmental issues, but provide for them a context that doesn't leave them feeling hopeless and overwhelmed with eco-anxiety. So I'm going to provide details about an alternative assessment I created for the course Introduction to Environmental Studies that I think offers one example of how to do this. Now, before I get into that, I think I need to provide a little bit of context to understand some of the design features I chose. So as Deb said, I'm a professor at Athabasca University, and that's an open and distance university. I teach undergraduates primarily through an asynchronous online platform. So so I have students who are just start, and I have them everywhere in between, and then at the end. They're all at different stages, right? And while I try to engage with them via phone and video chat, almost all the students do not want to engage in such a personal way with their tutor. So another matter is that, well, I created this course and I do tutor it. There also are other tutors, and some of them, especially if they come new to the course before I, had revised it, they have no input, or at the most, very little input into the design of it. So as well, most of the students are not seeking a degree from Athabasca University. Rather, they choose this course as an option to complete their degree at their parent institution, and there's no prerequisite for the course. So overall, I'd say that students are typically, fitting this course into an otherwise busy life, and myself or whoever the tutor is don't know them and are unlikely to engage with them again. Now, the assignment is called Critical Self-Reflection on Nature and Place. And I've been using it for 5 or 6 years now. And I undertook a revision recently of the course, and I kept this assignment, but I also have revised it. And I'll tell you a little bit about some of that revision as well. I have been grading it, but in the revision, I'm considering actually making it a pass and fail. So if you had some opinion about that, please share that as well. So I have to give the students, given that they don't like to engage very much, I have to give them enough context that they really, understand the assignment and how it relates to the broader course. So I've told them that the purpose of this assignment is to develop their observational and reporting skills, to identify some of their own views and assumptions about nature and the relationship between humans and the rest of the natural world, develop their writing voice, and further refine their critical analytical skills. But the more detailed instructions are these. They're to find a nearby natural place that they can visit and move through slowly, and note their observations in a journal and reflect on their visits in a short essay. So that's the overall description of it. For those with mobility challenges, there are some alternatives, and I include a note for those folks to contact me to discuss them. But I had a discussion with the editor for this course about using that term and how exclusive it is, right? That's not inclusive. I chose to keep it, because I've had students in the past do this activity, and I didn't move through it slowly. And what they did was they found the way to get through their path as quickly as possible using an e-bike or a scooter. This is a little slower, but running, and it really undermines the intent of the exercise. So I chose that wording, even though it's not inclusive. So they choose a place that they have to choose a place that's relatively easy to get to because they're asked to do this 10 times. Ideally, they would do it once a week, but I know most of them do it in a much more condensed timeline. And so I ask them to at least not to only do it once a day. As they visit the place, they're to observe and reflect on the space as they're moving through it. They're to stay often, stay still, be patient, and use all their senses to explore it. Purposely choose different weather for their visits and take note of the conditions. Pay attention to how they, what they feel and what they think as they move through that space. As they return to the same space, notice new things or subtle changes. And keep a journal of their visits and take it with them. And I'm totally fine if they want to just, use their phone and talk into it or whatever. And then, or they can, write, if they choose not to do it, write in a journal. They're encouraged to write in a journal as soon as they return. And also to take 1 or 2 pictures of what they observe. So each time they visit their chosen place, their observations and reflections are also to be guided by a prompt. So for their first visit, what is this place? And they're told that they can actually answer that in many different ways: historically, geologically, ecologically, politically, and so on. But for each of the remaining 9 visits, they're to select a different prompt and from the 15 that are offered. And so I have a few of them to just put there. And you'll see that the first one there, it asks them to do a little research, but they're cautioned in the instructions that this is not principally a secondary research assignment. So they really shouldn't spend a lot of time doing research. And indeed, they should reflect on what they find. Okay. So when they're done, they submit 4 things. They choose 3 of their self-reflections, the first one and then 2 others. And they also submit a short summary self-reflection in which they talk about the meaning of the experience, what key insights they've learned, and how it connects to the rest of the course. So I clearly indicate what they should focus on in completing the parts of the assignment. And I do this both for the students, but also because I'm not the only person who tutors this course, right? So it's instructive to the other tutors. They're told, the students are told they need to communicate clearly, but that grammar and formatting are not of primary importance. What is important is that they are detailed in their descriptions of what they're sensing and thinking. They include 1 or 2 select photos that relate directly to each of the reflections that they submit. They devote some of their reflection to thinking about the selected prompt as it pertains to their chosen place. And they engage critically regarding their perceptions, assumptions, and representations. So if you think back to those kind of 4 pillars that Deborah Davidson talked about in terms of really tapping into emotionality, this assignment is, tapping into the students' affective responses to a place. And in their detailed reflections and their final summary essays, I see ample evidence of them accomplishing this. As well, in the final summary essay, I often receive a lot of student feedback about the assignment. So students say a whole variety of things to me, right? Some students have indicated this is their favorite university assignment so far. It really changed how they looked at the course content and encourages them to get involved in a local environmental initiative. Their observations change their views about the local green space that they've been, traveling through, which for many of them they knew about before. They talk about really appreciating getting out in nature and that they need to do this more often. And also about appreciating having taking time to be reflective and slow down. Now, of course, the assignment isn't appreciated by all, right? So those students who really try to do it as fast as possible. But I'd have to say that more than any other assignment in the many courses I tutor and have created, I receive the most positive student feedback about this one. And it's also kind of built into the structure of the course because they have that summary self-reflection, right? And so that's also why I get so much feedback about it. So in addition to connecting to the students emotionally, you've likely seen that one of my objectives in this assignment is to encourage more critical analysis. And I have to say that in the past, the assignment has not been so successful in terms of achieving that objective. So in terms of the recent changes I made, I actually changed the probes from being optional because hardly any of the students chose them. And now I make it a mandatory part of their observations and reflections each time that they go. But I've also, revised the entire course, and I think I've done a better job of, modeling the reflection. So it's an online course, and it has 9 units, and each of the units, the students have worksheets. And for every worksheet at the bottom, they're asked a whole series of self-reflective questions about the topic that's central to that unit. So say, it's forests or something. It asks them a few questions about there. So it's kind of modeled in a variety of places, right? The assignments are all as well clearly connected to the course themes, and that's always been the case. But I've made it much more obvious to the students in how I've described the assignments, and that I refer back to them. And they're also most of the assignments are laddered, right? This one not so much, but well, it is in a way. I'll get to that. But so if you remember the probes that I had, right? Clearly, one of the themes is environmental justice, and in that, some of the questions certainly relate to environmental justice, and also are about empathy, which was the third factor in sort of drawing in emotionality. And then I align the assignments and the course commentary with the assignments much more deliberately and obviously. So in each unit, instead of lectures, because we don't have lectures, that's not what we do. There's some commentary, and in the commentary, half of it has to do with a case study. And the case studies, the students watch a video and then they're given questions. And the case studies are intended to help them see the kind of critical thinking and analysis they're to do. And it also gives them a whole bunch of tools. And so they can then, if they do this assignment at the end of their course, they've been given lots of practice to then integrate that into this course. So I think my time's up. So I'll end there.
Thanks, Lorelei, very much. I was thinking while you were talking whether the principles that Deborah shares in her book that you shared with us could also be applied to just assessment generally. Have you thought about that?
No, tell me more what they were thinking. So I haven't thought about that.
I love that whole idea that too often, we approach the environmental and other crises of the world from a perspective of guilt. Do you think, assessment that way too? Should we spend time trying to tear that wall down with students? In other words, that assessment, you do need to engage with your emotions as a student in the assessment activity. And it's not the emotion of guilt that we're trying to get students to feel at all. It really seemed that this is a good example of walking along beside students on that assessment journey.
Oh, that's
seeing
interesting.
through their eyes, those kinds of ideas. So I was just thinking whether those bigger ideas, obviously related to how we think about the environment, can also in some ways be applied to assessment generally.
Yeah, I'll have to think about that. That's so interesting, Deb. Right? I think you're right. Yeah, that there's so much there to think about.
Yeah. The response of the students is very interesting. Do you know that?
Oh, I can't hear you. Sorry, Deb, for some reason you muted now.
Sorry.
Okay. Sorry.
I thought this is such a nice case study when you have an assignment and then you rethink it, So what's your guidance or your advice to other people when they have an assessment task that they've used potentially for a while and they would like to rethink it? You know, that what are the most important things from your perspective to pay attention to?
Well, I certainly think that, thinking about what your goal in that assessment was and whether you're achieving that goal. I mean, I think that we're always as, I would think, as, professors thinking that through, how's this working and how is it not? And it was clear to me just looking through, the responses I would get as a tutor, but also talking to my other tutors about, where they thought that the assignments were successful and where they weren't. And it was clear to us that the second part of the assignment, right, where they're relating it to the course materials, they weren't doing a very good job of that at all. And so it was like, okay, how can you help them think about that, right? So I think, I think we all do that, I would assume, all the time, right? It's just that in our system, it's much harder because we have a whole production system that puts the courses up. So I can't just change it every 6 months, right? So I have to kind of wait and then think about how can I change this and make it more successful. But I would have to say that also being a part of this community, the alternative assessment community, which for me is a more recent development, that I've learned so much from other people about laddering assignments and really thinking about those connections. And so, which again, I would think like many of the people here already have that was something new to me, right? So, yeah.
Building in that scaffolding along the way. Yeah. Really nice. Thank you very much. Amy, are you with us? We're right on